Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mystery Theory podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a case that it's really frustrating, as most cases are, of course, because this is something that shouldn't have happened. But it's also one of those that you are left wondering, what if? What if she didn't move? What if she didn't, come back to her hometown? What if the what ifs in this case are really what inspired me to share with you this case and kind of get a little bit of feedback from you guys as well. Now, before I start with today's case, I want to say thank you to everyone that's been joining my Patreon page. Most of you guys follow me on my channel, The Mystery Theory, on YouTube, and there has been a new wave of new people that have been joining recently, really, in the month of October. A lot of new faces, a lot of comments and messages I received. So thank you so much for your support. I hope that you're enjoying the extra content if you join me there. But if you only listen to the podcast, thank you for being there today. I would love for you to leave a review on whatever platform you follow my podcast. If you have it in iTunes, it really helps my podcast to kind of go up in the charts when somebody is looking for true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, and everything that I cover here. So, thanks to everyone, really. I truly appreciate all the support. And I appreciate everyone sending me messages saying that they can't wait for the new case in a podcast. So now let's get started with today's case that takes place in Antigo, Wisconsin. I don't know about much about Wisconsin, but according to my research, this particular place is described as a family-friendly, sleepy town where Kayla and her brother, Jimmy, were born and raised. They had a typical childhood. They were super close and loved spending time outside, living a rather active lifestyle, and overall just a good situation, a loving family, close together, enjoying life. And if we fast forward to the year 2009, we're gonna find ourselves in Kayla's sophomore year. She was almost done with it, and at this point where the case starts to take place, Jimmy, her brother, had graduated and things were about to change for everyone. I've been there myself with my kids. I feel like high school, it's a period where you go up and down and have great days and some terrible days, and good friends and not so good friends. And when high school, when you go and you're just at the graduation day and they finally realize that high school is over, it's just one of those things that really kind of transforms part of the family. In this case, their mom was struggling a little, and she decided to try to get a clean slate and move to Texas, which it was going to be putting her in a situation where she would have some family closer to her, and she could they would help her get started. But Jimmy, he decided to stay behind in Wisconsin. Kayla could have stayed if she really wanted to, because her dad was staying in Wisconsin too. But she decided to go with her mom. Apparently, her father was going through cancer, and the treatment that he was going under left him with dialysis. So it was really hard, according to Kayla's mom, to see for Kayla to see her dad going through that horrible time. Her dad also, because of all these health issues, couldn't live alone, so he moved in with his parents. Now, Kayla's and Jimmy's grandparents, of course, but it was a tight situation. I mean, it was not a big house, but they made it work. It was hard for the kids to really see their dad suffer through the whole thing, but I think that Kayla, and according to her mom, she was really trying to give it a go to this Texas move, and this would give her a fresh start, full of hope, kind of thing. So they drive to Texas from Wisconsin to Texas. Pretty long drive. I think she said 1,300 miles, 22-hour drive. But they did it, and again, hoping for the best. Now, I don't know how much research Kayla's mom did on the high school that Kayla would be attending. Kayla was in her gymnastics team in Wisconsin, and they didn't have one of those in Texas. And I tell you, where my daughter is going to school, they don't have it. And I think it's very particular to some high schools that really focus on that and have athletes that are into that. But I don't think it's one of those programs that is offered in every high school, at least not that I know of. So that was kind of a deal breaker, according to Kayla's mom. And to add to it, after some time, and I'm not telling you a really long time, I'm telling you about weeks, they realized that the job was not great. The money was not great. Kayla was suffering because of that lack of her, involvement in gymnastics, and at the same time, Kayla's dad got worse, and Hope, which is Kayla's mom, didn't want her daughter to be away from her dad in the event of him dying. So, not long after arriving to Texas, they decide to go back to Antigo, Wisconsin. So they drove the 22 hours and 1,300 miles, but this time they were so excited. They couldn't wait to see their people, go back to what they knew, go back really home. But they had nothing really to come back to. They, of course, got rid of their place where they were living. They moved out. I don't know the specifics of it, but you'd say that if you're moving out of state and you're living in an apartment, you just wait until your lease is up and then move, or pay the fee to move early. If you're living in a house, kind of the same thing. So they came back and they didn't have a home. So while Hope was looking for a job, she would stay with friends, and Kayla decided to, instead of staying with her mom and her friends, that she was going to go stay with her dad at the grandparents' home. Now, the grandparents' house was more like a home base. Um, she really needed to catch up, according to her, with all of her friends, so she would stay at different friends' houses almost every night. On August 9th, exactly 1 week after coming back, Kayla tells her mom that she will be sleeping over at Natasha's house. The girls went out that night and didn't come back home to sleep. So Tasha's mom called Kayla's mom, wondering, did they end up going to you? Have you, do you know anything about the girls? And there was a rumor that the girls were going to secretly go to Wasau, which is a city about 35 miles away from Antigo. Apparently, that place is where Kayla's ex-boyfriend lived, and Hope knew that before leaving to Texas, Kayla was kind of serious with this guy, but she didn't like him. And he was a kind of a party boy. He was drinking and experimenting with drugs and kind of pulling Kayla into that. However, apparently a friend of Kayla, and her name is Megan, introduced Kayla and her friends to some of her friends in Wasau. And the going there was kind of an issue since then. So even though that, Hope thought that maybe Kayla was going to go see her ex-boyfriend, there was also this Megan friend who introduced Kayla to some of her friends that lived in that same place as her ex-boyfriend did. Now, they were partying and their parties got wild. A lot of underage drinking, running from the police, who busted those parties really almost every time. And when Kayla's and Tasha's mom were like, well, if we really can't get a hold of them, we need to go to the police and report them missing, right? So they go to the police station, where Hope gets a call saying that they are okay and that they spent the night in an outdoor party and they couldn't call because they had no cell phones. So they didn't end up, doing the police report or filing them as missing. But when they get home, Kayla tells her mom a little bit more about what she was doing. She also said that she was not going to go to Wasau again and that she, was going to try to stay away from bad influences. On Tuesday, August 11th, Kayla calls her mom's. And remember, this is Kayla and her mom. They're not living in the same place. Kayla is staying with her dad, not really, but staying with friends, but supposedly under dad's care. And the mom was living with her friends, so it was more of a I'm reporting to you. I call you every once in a while. I tell you I'm okay. I tell you what I'm doing. And on that day, on particular day, on August 11th, Kayla calls her mom and tells her that she's going to be at Tasha's. There was some witnesses that did see them at the park. They went to hang out, which was basically what she told her mom that she was going to do with her friend. And then they go back home to Tasha's house, and there they find Tasha's brother and one of his friends, Kevin, who was 24 years old at the time. Now, also, Kayla's brother is there with them. And remember Jimmy? Well, he was also there with Kevin and with Tasha's brother. At around 5 p.m., Tasha needs to leave to go to work. So Kayla and Kevin make plans to meet later, and he leaves at that time. At around 8:45, Kevin picks up Kayla, and that is when all this case really, the mystery of this case really starts, because that was the last time that she was seen alive. She never came back home. So the next day, they called this last person that was hanging out with her, who was Kevin. And he said, well, I was with her, but I dropped her off at this friend's house. I mean, remember, Kayla was sleeping over at different houses and different friends, and it was one of those situations where most people did understand why she was doing it, including her mom, her dad, and family. When she was staying with her grandparents, Kayla was living in not this perfect situation for a teenager, and she was sleeping on a cot in the hallway. So, if the friends offered to open their homes to Kayla, I mean, her family had no problem whatsoever. So when Kayla would stay out all night, they would worry, but in certain occasions, like, you know, they were not sure where she spent the night or stuff like that. But it wasn't uncommon for her to not come back at night. So Hope, which is Kayla's mom, calls her ex-husband at one point, and she asks him, where's Kayla? Where did she go? And he says, well, she didn't come home, but I assume that she's at a friend's house. They call Kayla's friends, and they finally talk to a girl who said that she did see Kayla at 9:30 p.m. the night before, and that she was with Kevin, and they went by her job, which was a McDonald's, and she even mentioned that apparently Kevin was driving around with her, trying to give her a welcome home gift, which was some kind of marijuana or something like that. So they were smoking and they were driving around, and Kayla did tell that friend that worked at McDonald's, I will be back later. I'll come back when you're off. Jimmy, which is Kayla's brother, he was sure that she was staying with a friend. I mean, he even knew who he thought that she was spending the night at. Apparently there was a friend that the parents didn't know, but Jimmy is like, okay, I think I know where Kayla is, let me go, and blah blah blah, and he ended up going there and realizing that she was not there. Now Kevin starts to go into detail, and he actually said that he dropped her off at her ex-boyfriend's house in Wasau. Now Hope thought that Kayla was done with this guy, remember Miguel? But he was the one throwing those illegal parties, so maybe that's why she was going there. So Hope, calls Miguel, and he asks him, where Kayla is. And he says, well, I saw her about a week ago on Friday, but I haven't since then. They ended up reporting Kayla later on as a runaway. And again, this was not immediately because she was not staying in one place, and it was hard to keep tabs on her. When they reported Kayla, the police thought that she was a runaway, and however, they still decided to question Kevin. And the address that he gave the police where he dropped her off at the boyfriend's house is where the boyfriend used to live. But it's been empty because the city condemned the place. So for a while, Miguel was renting another house about a mile away from that one. And what really didn't make sense was that Kayla was at the new house the Friday before. Remember when Miguel said that he saw her? Well, it was because she attended this party that he was throwing at his place. So why would she go to an empty house that was condemned by the city? It was really, it didn't really make sense from the get-go. So apparently what Kevin said is that he pulled in the driveway of a dark house that was empty and decided to drop off Kayla with no cell phone, no money, and no means to get back home. Definitely doesn't make sense. The police talked to Miguel, and he said he saw her the week prior, of course, like he said to Kayla's mom. They checked his house. They find nothing really connected to Kayla. They checked the old house that was condemned, and they find nothing there. But 3 days later, after all this investigation and all this nonsense on Kevin's part, she was considered an endangered child. 2 weeks later, there was some Walmart footage of what they thought was Kayla. But when her mom looked at that, she knew that it wasn't Kayla. Now you have to understand that at this point, people started talking. And they started giving crazy theories about what could have happened to Kayla. Was she pregnant? And, was she killed? Did she leave? According to her friends, Miguel, who was not Hope's favorite guy in the world, was considered a really nice guy to her. And they didn't understand why. If Miguel and Kayla were going to meet, why wouldn't Miguel pick her up? It just didn't make sense. They searched the entire area, including the lake across the street from Miguel's house, but they couldn't find anything there. Kevin's timeline kind of checks out because he said that he dropped her off at around 10:30 on August the 11th, and it would have taken him about an hour to drive back home, where his mom said he arrived at around 12. So it actually makes sense what he said. However, he gets charged with reckless endangerment for the smoking and driving around part that they were having their little party in the car. He hired a lawyer and later on was found not guilty. They had checked Kevin and Miguel's car with luminol. Apparently on different occasions, it wasn't at the same time, and something did show up, but it was not clear enough if it was something from a body that was placed in the car, and that was in Kevin's car. So on December of 2009, they take a couple of dogs to sniff the vehicles, and apparently again it showed that they could smell traces of human remains in one of them, and they they did it in a way where they could confuse the dogs. They put a lineup of 10 cars, and in one of those cars was Kevin's. So they wanted to see if the dog made a mistake in the beginning, but the dog didn't, because once again it indicated in Kevin's car that they were at some point some human remains or something worth investigating. And it only makes sense, because if you think about it, he was the last one to talk to Kayla the night before. He was the one, the last person to text Kayla, to call her. And before picking her up, apparently at some point his phone either died or he turned it off. Miguel never talked to Kayla that night. So it is looking more and more like Kevin was the one that should provide with the most information. At some point, even the National Guard helped to look for Kayla, took dogs, and in one part of the woods, they showed, or they found, signs of something. And this place was part of Kevin's parents' property. And then again, they searched the potato farm where Kevin worked at, and they also spotted something there. On August 8th, 2011, a judge dismissed the charges against Kevin. Apparently, there was a lot of lack of evidence, and honestly, mostly circumstantial evidence that kind of was behind the charge itself. So it was dismissed, and that was kind of the end for the Kevin thing. 7 years later, a video posted of a guy showing a girl that he had tied in his bathroom resurfaced, and it looked like Kayla. To her mom, it looked like Kayla. Eventually, they investigated, and it was a hoax. The video, I watched it. It was terrible. It was this girl tied in somewhere in the bathroom. She was on the floor, and the guy opens the door. She starts screaming, and she seemed like in terror of this guy who was talking to the camera, really. It looked super real, so I'm assuming that she was a great actress. I want to think that that's really what it was, but it was not a real video, and that was not Kayla. Now, what do you do with a bunch of circumstantial evidence that points to somebody when you really cannot use that in court? Well, that's when you have when you really have an unsolved murder or a mystery. I talk about this several times before, but it kind of goes to the character of the person that's being questioned. In this case, Kevin, who had no priors and who really stayed out of trouble, who was a good friend to a bunch of young girls and the driver for most of them. And all of a sudden, this happens, and it looks terrible for him. But his reputation precedes him, in this case, in a good way. I mentioned this in the Peterson's case. If Scott Peterson would have been a good husband, maybe the circumstantial evidence that the piling amount of circumstantial evidence that they had, wouldn't have been enough to convict him. Because, again, it's circumstantial evidence. Now, I'm not going to say that there's not, hard evidence against Scott Peterson. All I'm saying is you have a bunch of circumstantial evidence and a guy with a terrible reputation. And you have, a bunch of circumstantial evidence and what it looks like a good guy with no priors, and really a bunch of people that say he's been my friend forever. I don't think he could have done that. So circumstantial evidence on both cases. However, one has a bad reputation and the other one not so much. And that, my friend, is the truth behind these cases. Your reputation and this kind of thing, it's so important in this kind of cases, because if you really think about it, a lot of people would have looked a lot more innocent if they didn't have a lot of secrets. I remember seeing the Watts case, and I remember seeing him in camera in the very beginning before he started talking, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, where's his wife? Where are their children? I can even put myself for 2 seconds in his shoes. And then we start seeing how he behaves and what he says, and we find, a mistress, and then we find that this guy was not, the same guy that a lot of people thought he was. So even though he had good friends that believed that he was a good guy, his bad reputation for bad choices that he made put him in a situation where it kind of erased everything good that other people believed about him. And in the Watts case, it was not circumstantial evidence, so it's I almost doubted mentioning it. But I think my point in talking about all these cases is that there is a connection. I think there's a human connection with somebody's reputation and justice. I think there is, and sometimes it makes me kind of wonder. I don't know, because I think that you can be a really bad person and not commit a crime. You can be somebody with a terrible reputation and really not be, not have it in you to harm somebody else. But if you really think about it, there's a connection. And I guess that's what I wanted to share with you today. That in this case, the reputation of somebody could have saved him from going to jail. And I'm not saying that Kevin is guilty or that he did something to her, but I'm going to tell you my thoughts as always. Of course, he is an innocent man, as far as my research, but she could have been taken somewhere else. There's a lot of cases where somebody becomes friendly with young girls, pretty girls, and that they gain their trust just enough so they can be alone with them and then sell them into sex trafficking or whatever. And in some of those cases, they don't even know that that's what they're doing. Sometimes they tell them, well, just bring this girl, blah, 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 and we'll do, they give them different, scenarios, I guess, or ideas of what they're going to do with the girls. And then in the end, that's what they're doing. Now, that would mean that Kevin would have to make an effort to make so many friends. Because once one of them disappeared with him, I mean, how is he going to keep the business going? People are going to know, So that was one of the theories that it kind of made sense in my head, but really, those are just opinions and based on opinions only. And then there's also the possibility that that gift, welcome back gift that he was planning to give to Kayla, maybe she didn't receive it the way that he expected. Maybe that gift was something else. Maybe they went somewhere to be alone, or to talk, or to smoke, or to listen to music, and maybe she said no, and things escalated, and this was 100% something that he didn't plan. But where is she? Where is Kayla? Maybe Kayla will be one of those people that will show up somewhere years and years from now. But everything points to one person. There's even some evidence, circumstantial, but still evidence that points to him. But his reputation, his friends, the potential alibi, the mom telling that he got there at midnight, even though he turned off his phone, and that's kind of a red flag if you ask me. So he's not tracked. I mean, you just have to put 2 and 2 together, and it looks like it's a 4. But in this case, it's still open. It remains unsolved. And I can't even put myself in Hope's shoes. Not for even a second, because I moved very far away from where I was living. And I think that once you move to a new place, you kind of have that sense of alert and trying to make sure that whoever is by your children, who they are, stay by me. You have all those questions like, is this, a good person that is talking to my kids, or is this? And then you go home to what you know of being home. And when I spent some time there, because I had to go back for some doctor's appointments, and I spent there for about a week, I felt safe. It's people I knew, places I knew, streets I've driven for 20 years. So I can only imagine that's what Hope felt when she came back home, and when she came back to her hometown, to her kids' hometown, and then this terrible thing happening within days, weeks of going back. It really breaks my heart to think about it. I just truly hope that there's something, that something pops up, that something gets, the attention from the police, and that this case eventually, I hope, will be solved. Kayla's dad died thinking that she was going to come back one day. And maybe they met in the afterlife already, and he's not waiting for her. But I think it must be the hardest thing to not know where your daughter is every single night. For hope, for her brother, for her friends. A true unsolved mystery that I hope doesn't stay that way. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate every single one of you coming back for the podcast. I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye, guys.